In this video, I'm going to list the top mistakes people make with their classic cars. Watch all the way through and you'll see at the end the one that will definitely leave you high and dry. Critical mistake that people often make when they're working on their classic car is the small details. Keep the car tuned up, right? You never imagine how much not having your car tuned up right is going to affect how it runs and how reliable it's going to be. Anytime I buy a car, I'm going to go ahead and give it a fresh tune-up so I have a good baseline on it. And I recommend you tune up your car at least every year. You know, pay special attention to spark plugs. Make sure your plug wires are getting serviced. If you need to do cap and rotor, go ahead. Except for, don't buy it from whoever I bought this from. How am I supposed to tune up my car with that? Another common mistake people make is not changing away from these old antiquated breakerless points ignition systems. In my opinion, they need to go in the trash. Take a traditional distributor. That's what spins it around. Every time it spins, it opens those points and gives a spark. Again, unreliable in my opinion. So what I'm going to do on my son's car here is I'm going to take those points out and I'm going to put an electronic ignition conversion kit in there. Pertronix makes a great kit. MSD, all kinds of people make them. It doesn't really matter what brand you do, but pretty easy. You could just take this, put it inside your distributor and replace the points, and then you wire it up to the ignition coil. They recommend you use a different coil when you do these as well because it's going to have a little bit hotter spark. And then when you're done, you'll have something like this, where it's got an electronic brain, less moving parts, magnetic pickup, super reliable. So we're going to get that in here, and I'll show you how she runs. That is exactly what I'm talking about. Fresh tune-up, electronic ignition, fires right up. We're getting there. Another mistake you commonly see is not having enough voltage to the ignition system. So on this part, we just did a Pertronix, and it used to have a ballast resistor, which cut voltage down to like 10 volts. Any modern system, if you've got electronic ignition, you're going to want to have at least 12 volts to the coil. It's very important. Otherwise, you don't get a full juice spark, right? If your points often have 9, 10, 12, but if you're going to run electronics, you need to have 14 volts, at least 12 when it's fired up. So go ahead and start it up. See how we're right there? We're at about 12. If I give it a little throttle. Yeah, there we go. It just warmed up. So 12.5. Another big mistake people make with classic cars is not having a good enough battery. You want to make sure that your battery has plenty of cold cranking amps. Most V8s, I'm going to run about 700 or 800 cold cranking amps. That's going to basically dictate how strong that battery is, right? You want a full-size battery like this one. Most of them will have a date code on it, so make sure you have a fresh battery. Also, make sure the battery is secure. A battery that falls out is dangerous, surely not reliable. Another thing you see oftentimes is there's a lot going on. If you come check out here, there's a lot going on here at this battery terminal, right? I don't like to see too much going on here. A lot of times that can be a problem. But these ones look like they're secured really nice and tight. What I don't like to see is guys will use these bolt-on ends that you see here. They're a pain in a pinch, but you really want to make sure that you're getting a good connection. So when you have a cable like this, ideally what you'll do is you can get a nice lug end and you can solder in here and then put your terminal in there and you've got an actual battery cable end like you would see on a production battery cable. Or simply buy a battery cable and change it, right? That's often easy, but when they're hard to get to, this lug trick is a great way to go. And for those of you that let your car sit or you have battery draw issues, sometimes you can do a battery disconnect switch. This is a really basic $12 unit. You can just turn the knob. When you do that, it loosens the cable and disconnects it so it shuts off the power to the car. So make sure you got a good, strong battery. Got to keep this motor running. It doesn't start unless it starts with this. We were just talking about electrical on these cars, how important voltage is at your distributor, how important your battery is. Another mistake people make is not to have a good enough alternator. So if you're running aftermarket accessories like this guy is, we've got electric fans here, we've got stereo, we've got AC. In these types of situations, I like to go to a big, fat, heavy-duty alternator. This one's a little extreme, 350 amp, but the factory one is probably 40 amp. So you can get a replacement cast or chrome type for about $100, $150 for a 100 amp alternator, all the way up to something like this that's probably $400 or $500. That's overkill. But the point being, you want to make sure you're putting out ample voltage to keep your battery charged. You also want to make sure, a lot of people miss this one especially, Is that idle? Is it putting out 14 volts? A lot of alternators need a smaller pulley or to be driven properly or rebuilt so they'll actually put out 14 volts at idle, not just when they're at RPM. Another common mistake people make is they don't get an electric choke on their carburetor. An electric choke is going to help the car start when it's cold and kick up your idle a little bit until it warms up. So it'll hold the flap open a little bit and then open progressively over time. So in this example, this is your electric choke right here. And when the motor is cold, it's going to have this closed, probably a little more than that, right? And then once it warms up, this will start to open. And then when you do that, you just wrap your throttle and your RPMs will go from get you a nice idle. So we want to see about an 800 RPM idle. If we've got an automatic transmission, it should go to about 6 in gear. And if you've got a manual transmission, probably about a 600 idle. But don't forget how important a choke can be for reliability and cruisability, especially in terms of like easy starts and happy morning. Another common problem is starters on these old cars. So a lot of guys make the mistake of sticking with the old starter. When they work great, they work great. But a lot of these cars are notorious for getting heat soaked. And so when you turn it off, the starter goes really slow. So an option here on this Pontiac is you can put a heat wrap. You can either do a wrap or they do some metal shields. They're going to really kind of protect that starter from getting too hot. So you're going to have reliable cranking and starting. Another better option, probably a couple $100, so not too big of a deal for those of you that don't mind spending a couple bucks on your car, is to get a nice quality mini torque starter. So a mini torque starter is mini and has a lot more torque, right? It's going to turn the engine faster, stronger, so it starts up better. They also tend to crank with a little bit less power, so they don't have as much demand. So a mini torque starter is a phenomenal upgrade for your muscle car. Another major mistake people make is to trust the old fan on these old cars. So on a classic car, more air, the better, right? On any car. So check out my son's car here. He's got an upgraded fan, right? It's got more blades than the stock 4 blade, but he doesn't have a shroud. This fan's so far back, it's trying to push air, seeing if it can do any good. It's not going to move a lot of air unless the car's moving. So what you really want to do, they've already done one step here, which is to get a little bit better fan blade, right? More blades and a shroud. So on this car, I'm going to go ahead and upgrade the radiator. It's got a nice fan shroud on it. And you can see when you have a shroud, that fan's going to be in there. It's going to create a wind tunnel and pull a ton of air through the car. Another option, if you want, is to add like an electric fan on there. I don't usually rely on an electric fan on an old car like this, but you can see in here, if I was to install it behind the grill, I could use this as a pusher. Really helps in traffic, really helps reduce heat. While we're talking cooling system, another mistake people always make is the thermostat. Never forget how important this little guy is in terms of opening and closing and creating the proper speed and level of water flow. I took this guy out. In here, we changed the water neck too, obviously. But I go to a 160 degree. That's what I prefer. We live in a hot environment. So it opens up my cooling system at 160, gets everything circulating nicely. In addition to that, what I'll almost always do is I'll ditch the stock radiator cap and go with the Lev-r-vent type that allows us to put it on there, lock it down, boom. If you need to release pressure, you can just pop it. This is a 13-pounder. It's very important that you get the right poundage for your system. Otherwise, you can blow hoses and such. Lastly, anytime you can, do some kind of an overflow bottle, right? It could be a water bottle for all I care, but just something so when you open that or when it overheats, it can purge and go into a catch can. Keeps you from making a mess, keeps you from losing coolant, keeps you going down the road cool. Buying the right car is where it all starts. So check out the links below and you'll see my inspection checklist to help save you money on your next car purchase. So that brings us to the number one biggest mistake I see classic car owners make. The fuel gauge. Don't trust the fuel gauge. They lie, always. Never try to find out exactly where E is. You think that's out of gas? How do you know it's not here? Because you got a gauge you got to trust, which usually is okay. It's this stupid thing, the fuel sending unit. I don't know why they never seem to work right. Empty, full, middle. It shouldn't be that hard, but somehow they always seem to read wrong. I don't know what the deal is. Don't run your gauge below a quarter tank if you can help it for 2 reasons. 1, you don't want to run out of gas. 2, you don't want to suck up a bunch of dirt. Pay attention. Most important thing, fuel gauge.